This happened 15 years ago. One night, when I was waiting at home for some of my friends to come and collect me so we could go stay by the seaside. I'm a female, by the way. We were set to leave at night, and I was in the bathroom taking a shower. After the shower, I was drying my hair with a hairdryer. I was stood in the bathroom, and the bathroom had a small window about head height, just off to the side of the sink. I was hot since it was summer, so I opened the window a little. I was casually glancing out of the window looking at the roof of the building next door, and that was when I noticed something shiny. What the hell is that? I wondered. I stopped drying my hair to take a closer look. There was a bright, small object, kind of hovering in the night sky. Oh, it's a UFO, I thought, with a strange kind of rush of excitement. My excitement of seeing the unknown outweighed my fear of it. My logical brain snapped back into gear, and I decided to hit the lights in the bathroom. I didn't want the unidentified flying object to see me. I felt very strongly about that for some reason. I turned my hairdryer back on and kept watching the object with interest. I finished drying my hair, and the UFO out there was still hovering. I thought that it would be a kind of cool thing to talk about with my family. I was kind of hoping one of them would know exactly what that thing was and we could all have a laugh about it. I pulled out my Polaroid camera and I got ready to snap a picture. My camera was only one of those instant print cameras, so I knew that the quality wasn't going to be great. It did have a flash though, so I thought that I might get something. I aimed my camera out of the window at the flying object and I took a photo. The small flash on my camera lit up the night sky in a quick flash of light. As soon as my camera flash went off, the object kind of reacted. It appeared to grow larger and larger. Since it looked like it could have been coming closer, I started to freak out a little. It seemed as if it spotted me. I silently closed the window and headed out of the bathroom and into the room with my family. Luckily everyone was still awake and they were sitting around in the lounge. I told my mum and sister about what had happened, and I showed them the photo I took, and to my surprise it was blank. I couldn't make out anything. It just looked like a photo of the night sky. I couldn't believe it. I was supposed to be getting ready for a fun trip with my friends, but now I was feeling pretty disturbed about what I had just witnessed. I decided to do my makeup in the lounge, in the company of my family. We spoke about all kinds of things and I became less and less worried about the UFO. My friends arrived and I left for the sea without incident. When I came back from my trip, I knew instantly that there was something wrong at home. There was a vibe in the house, you know, an awkward and stilted kind of atmosphere. I went to my mother to ask about what had happened in my absence. And something big had happened. A home invasion. An unknown individual, or set of individuals, broke into my sister's bedroom at night. The police had come out and questioned my sister. It had really shaken her up, and she was described as being completely petrified by my mother. I wanted to ask my sister about it and show her some comfort, but when I went to speak with her, she seemed super pissed off at me. Here's what happened in short. She fell asleep, as normal that night, as I left for my trip. But she woke up a little later, suffering with sleep paralysis. She noticed that there was someone in the room with her. Then she noticed that there was more than one person in the room with her. She didn't even know how many there were. They appeared to be coming out of the shadows. She tried to get up, but found that she couldn't move a muscle. Those shadowy figures stood over her, and they were touching her and prodding her body. She said she didn't know what they were doing, but it felt wrong. She felt feelings and sensations of pain and fear that she had great difficulty in attempting to describe. She said that she was a prisoner in her own body while these human-like things did things to her. She thought that the whole terrifying ordeal lasted around an hour, and then she was suddenly able to move again. When she looked down at her body, she noticed that she was covered in countless bruises and scratches. She looked around the room as soon as she was able to move and saw no one was there. Naturally, my sister was horrified, so she screamed the house down. and my mum came rushing in to see her. It was my mother who called the police. The house was locked tight that night. The police found no evidence of a break-in too. My sister said that the only thing she could tie to the experience was my experience in the bathroom, seeing that hovering object. So she was mad at me. She thought that my taking a photo of what I saw out there had brought this on. If a police officer from Kobe who was working about 15 years ago ends up reading this, then you might remember the case, but I think the chances of that happening are pretty slim. If I hadn't gone on that trip, maybe it would have been me who had the visit. If I hadn't taken that photo, nothing might have happened too. I feel really sorry and bad about what happened to my sister. It didn't end there, though, unfortunately. Well, don't get me wrong, my sister is alive and very well. However, in my case, I felt as if I had been followed by something for about 2 years. About 2 months after the incident, I was riding my bike around the city and I noticed one evening that there was something hovering in the sky up ahead of me. I stopped my bike and I instantly thought, oh God, it's that UFO thing. I was honestly terrified. I instantly thought of what my poor sister had to go through. But this time the flying object looked as if it was black and not shining. It looked a similar shape, but it was matte black in color. I was on a kind of hill, and I could see it quite clearly. Judging by some of the buildings close to it, I assumed it was about 1 kilometer away. It's really hard to explain these things in words. It was 100% really there, but it looked like it could have been CGI or a still from a film. It was like it was too much for the naked eye to comprehend, like watching a film in 3D without the glasses. I ran into a nearby fast food restaurant. I wanted to be around people. I didn't leave the fast food restaurant for about an hour, and when I left, the UFO was gone. Similar incidents happened like that for about 2 years. There was one which lasted almost a day. It was like I was being monitored, surveilled, you know? There is no real reason for any of this happening, and I guess I sound completely mad, but I can say that it was 100% true. These things did happen to me, and I know that they happened to my sister. I saw the marks on her body. My words cannot convey the fear I have of whatever that thing was that harassed my sister. I heard a part of this story from my grandpa. I was staying with him one Saturday night. I can't remember why, maybe it was just to give my parents the night off. I always looked forward to visiting my grandparents though. They lived way out in the middle of nowhere, and there were loads of fun things to do there. I loved exploring the woods, looking for bugs and going down to the river, that kind of thing. But the place I loved the most at my grandparents' was this little log cabin he had built on the mountainside of his property. I was in 4th grade at the time, and when I was that age, the cabin felt as if it was my own secret little base. I was so excited to go there. I loved sleeping out in the cabin. It wasn't far from the main house, but far enough to make it feel as if you were sleeping out in the woods alone, especially at that age. I loved waking up early, when the sunlight shone through the windows of the lodge, and then going bug hunting. I loved collecting beetles. I always released them there. My grandfather was a keen fisherman, and he would often head out deep into the mountains to do some stream fishing. Or he would head down to the shoreline. He lived close to the sea. So when I woke up that morning, I knew I had the run of the place to myself. I left to hunt bugs in the woods. Things went pretty much downhill as soon as I headed into those woods. I mean, literally. They were on the mountainside, like I said, and I slipped and injured my leg really badly. I was crying and trying to limp back towards the general direction of the cabin. The pain was getting worse with each step. I didn't really want to look down at the wound. I knew it was bleeding badly as I could feel the wetness. It was midsummer. I was sweaty enough as it was, but there was a new kind of sweat on my brow, a cold one. I was really worried. Worried of getting lost mainly. Worried of not making it back to the cabin. I felt as if I needed a moment to compose myself, and I sat down there on a fallen tree limb. My head was feeling incredibly, I don't know if this is the best word to describe it, but fuzzy. And that feeling is the last thing I can remember. The rest of my experience is what my grandpa told me. My grandpa went back to check on me in the cabin when he came back from fishing and found that I wasn't there. He panicked and went out to search for me. He looked around the area restlessly but couldn't find me. Later he returned to the cabin and saw me there lying on the ground in front of it. He said that he saw 2 girls about my age running away from the cabin as he returned. He believed that those 2 girls brought me back. He tried to catch up to them, but he couldn't. The sun had begun to set at that point, and they were much too quick for my tired old grandpa. They disappeared into the woods. He shouted out to them, but they didn't respond. It didn't look to him as if I had been placed on the ground by the cabin. It looked like I had been dropped or thrown. It seemed really strange to him. My legs were badly swollen. Grandpa scooped me up into his arms and rushed me to a hospital. It was there that it was discovered that I had broken my leg. The doctor described the break as one common with a fall from height. It gets weirder and weirder. Before dawn that morning, Grandpa said that he experienced something strange. When he was fishing, he said that there was a huge glowing object out over the sea. He said that it was speeding above the water, and he couldn't catch a single fish that morning. He thought that he had seen a UFO. I have had years to think about the experience, and sometimes I wonder if the girls he saw running away from my unconscious body were perhaps something not of this earth. My grandpa is adamant that those girls are aliens. He's a bit of a wild theorist though. He says that there is a buried city under the Totori sand dunes. He often says outrageous things like that. I didn't have much faith to begin with that I had met extraterrestrials, but I cannot say something very strange and disturbing didn't happen, because it did. I sat down. My head was a blur. I woke up in hospital with a broken leg 8 hours later. That's the facts. I know that is true. But what happened in those 8 hours will forever likely remain a mystery. I live outside the city. I love the quiet of the countryside. My workplace is alongside the highway, and I'm a practicing orthopedic surgeon. I should say that I was a surgeon. I haven't long since retired. I handed my practice down to my son, who followed in my footsteps. We weren't the only clinic outside of the city, but we often got visits from out-of-town patients. It all started when we had a patient attend complaining of a neck strain. She said she had suffered it in her sleep. We took an x-ray, and something unusual appeared on that x-ray. There was a whitish-looking shadow. Based on my experience, I guessed that the shadow belonged to something foreign, and I guessed that it was metal. In terms of the shape, the closest thing I can say it looked like was a bike lock key. Slightly shorter key with an irregular shape. In length, I would say it was no longer than 15 millimeters. It's never easy to ask a patient about matters like that. I have dealt with patients who have cited trauma at the first instance of inquiry. I was interested in finding out what that foreign object was, because it didn't look familiar. So rather than ask, I thought I would incorporate it into my explanation of the x-ray. I could then ask questions, you see. I asked the patient a few questions, and finally asked if she had any history of surgery. She said that she couldn't remember any incidences where this foreign object inside her body could be explained. I vehemently recommended she get it looked at in a hospital, and if not, a specialized doctor. I'm not sure if she took my advice though. A few years later, I saw her again. Well, not actually her, but I saw her in another patient. A woman of the same sort of age, height, weight, and build entered my surgery, and I found myself asking similar sort of questions. When I asked her about what we both saw on the x-ray, I found that the reason for the object wasn't down to previous surgery. I asked her how long that object had been in her body, and she said something along the lines of the following. Well, I don't know if you're gonna laugh at me or not, but I saw a UFO. We spoke for a while, and I ascertained that she had no memory after she saw something in the sky that she couldn't explain. It was as if her memory had been cut off, and that is, in her own words. She said that she was missing time out of her day and night. To me, it was absurd. I thought, okay, we have a couple of similarities, but not much more, but still, it lingered in the back of my mind. The two patients with the same strange objects that had mysteriously appeared in their bodies didn't have to wait long for a third to join their growing club. A third patient came in complaining of memory loss and a strain to her neck. It was only when the third patient came in did I notice a similarity I couldn't have noticed before. She and the other two were from the same town. Like I said, my practice is on a main highway, and her town, or their town, wasn't too far away. I checked her address, her age, and it was similar to the others. This time I offered the third patient a full-body x-ray. Lo and behold, I found what I knew I would find. Metal in the same area, the cervical vertebrae. If you're unsure of where that is, not trying to teach anyone to suck eggs or anything, but it is basically the back of the neck, and all three patients had foreign metal objects in the backs of their necks. It consists of 7 bones, C1 to C7, and those bones are separated by discs. These invertebral discs allow the spine to move freely and act as a natural shock absorber, if you will. The foreign object was more or less in the same place in all 3 patients. I insisted that she visit the hospital, and to be honest, she was the most receptive to my advice. Perhaps I might have been more firm with the others, but if I was like that with every patient, our country would be full of hypochondriacs, if not the world. I tried to create as many opportunities for her to speak as freely as possible. I encouraged her to feel free to tell me whatever she could, which might help with the diagnosis. And she said, I saw a bright light approach when I was on the roof of my building once. I tried to persuade her that she hadn't seen what she thought she had seen, but her faith in her belief and what she was claiming to see was unwavering. She rode the waves of my questioning. She told me she had her experience when she was younger. She seemed to be the one with the strongest memories out of the 3. She said that she could vividly, yet distinctively, remember being atop a mountainous area with 7 or 8 people. The location, she said, was a plateau in the woods midway up a mountain. There was a shrine there. She remembered something glowing hovering above the shrine when she was younger, and she could never forget that. She said that before she fell to the ground, 7 or 8 people around her were already lying on the ground, and then she lost consciousness. By the time light flickered against her eyelids, she guessed that 3 to 4 hours had passed. Initially, I thought that my patients had something odd in common. I even laughed off the idea of extraterrestrial interference in my mind multiple times. I mean, it wasn't until the 3rd patient that I took it seriously. I spoke with a few other locals. We often relied on other practices in our area for various reasons: second opinions, emergency supplies, and of course, company. The company appears to be specific. I took it upon myself to ask one of my colleagues if he had experienced anything similar to my 3 patients, and he said that he had. Apparently my 2nd patient had visited his practice. It really bothered me, these similar experiences and the foreign objects in those young women's necks. But without my patient's permission, I couldn't just cut into them to see what it was. I keep watching local news and the skies for any updates. It really bothers me. This is a mysterious experience I have trouble getting my head around. It happened about 3 years ago, but I find myself constantly reliving that night. There is a park about 30 seconds from my place. I used to really like it. In that park there's a stadium. The stadium is used in high school level qualifying rounds of baseball in our district. It's a pretty big stadium. On nights where I have trouble sleeping or I just feel like going for a walk, I head up the park and into the stadium. There was a spot by the stadium where I used to smoke. In spring it became a nightly routine for me. I loved the breeze and the quiet of the night. It was a nice spot because I was above the pitch and I could look downwards into it. One night I was up until about 2 a.m. I was really struggling with sleep that night. I headed through the park and up towards the stadium as usual. I stopped in my track when I noticed something out of place. It looked like there was someone stood right in the middle of the stadium. It looked pretty suspicious. Was someone sneaking in? As I crept closer, I realized that it wasn't a person. I could tell by the silhouette it cast. It was about 2.5 or 3 meters tall. That's over 8 feet tall, pushing 9 foot, maybe. It was like this white, longish pole-like thing. Kind of seeing a lamppost, but completely white. It was pointed and cone-like at each end, like a lemon, and it looked to be about 30 centimeters thick. On closer inspection, there was 2 of these long, white pole things. They were hovering over the pitch inside the stadium. They were going around and around in circles as if they were looking for something. It was just the strangest thing I had ever witnessed. I stared at it for so long, but I still couldn't understand what I was looking at. I watched those objects circle around the pitch for about 30 minutes. I found it strangely hypnotic. I started to get sleepy, so I headed back home. I thought about those strange objects all day at work, and when night came, and the hour grew late, I made my plan to head back to the stadium to see if the strange objects would be back. I arrived there at about 2 a.m., just like the night before. I looked out at the center of the pitch and I saw nothing. I started to doubt what I saw the night before. I wondered if it was just my imagination. I went to leave and something caught my eye. I saw what I came to see. It was at the edge of the stadium, near the bench the players sit on. It was there, floating in the air, just like last time. However, there was only one of the pole-like things this time. I looked all over to see if I could find the other one, and then I did find it. It was about 10 meters away from me on the outside of the stadium. It moved closer to me in an instant, and I saw something I'll never forget. It looked like the image of Munch's The Scream, but just the head, not the body. It was stretched vertically across the surface of the pole. It looked like it was vertically processing the image of someone's scream of horror. It was floating in the air in front of me, as if it was deliberately trying to show me this terrifying scream. I thought whatever phenomenon this was limited to the confines of the stadium, so when I saw it right in front of me, I was terrified. I actually screamed. I was so scared I ran as fast as I could. I thought that if I went straight home, then whatever this thing was would find out where I live. I left the park in a different direction, walked around for a bit, and then entered my house through the back door. Even when I was home, my heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't get to sleep that night. I decided not to go to the park and the stadium at night anymore. I told my friends and some neighbors about the experience, but none of them believed me. I looked up the park to see if anything had happened there, murders, or if it had been registered as a haunted spot or something like that, but I found no reports of anything paranormal. I did find a few stories of UFO sightings though. It's a wild theory, but one I'm buying into. I think I might have witnessed something extraterrestrial that night, or some kind of secret advanced technology from the military perhaps. After a few months, my fear of the park faded and my normal routine returned. However, I never saw those long pole-like things again. I really want to know what that was all about. 3 years ago I went to Guam on a diving trip, and I heard this story from a fellow diver from Nagoya. In April of the year 1990, he traveled to a small fishing village in Indonesia. He said that he woke up in the middle of the night on the second night of his trip. He heard a loud noise similar to a roar coming from the direction of the sea. His room lit up as a bolt of light shot through the sky. He said that he was surprised, but he was still able to get back to sleep without any issues. He guessed that perhaps a plane had crashed, or it was a particularly loud bout of thunder and lightning. Anyway, 3 days go by and he said that he was on the beach drinking beers. He saw a little crowd of locals gathering around about 10 meters away near the shore. He decided to get up and see what the fuss was about. As he got closer, he saw that some of the men in the group were hauling in a huge net. Women and children were there, and everyone had grave looks on their faces. It wasn't a trivial matter. It looked to him like someone had caught something really big, and he wanted to see what it was. It was a huge catch. There were fish flopping around in the net as it was being pulled to the sandy shore. Inside the net was a shark. It looked to be about 3 meters long. The shark was already dead though. It looked like it had a swollen stomach, so he thought that it could be a pregnant female. Perhaps. It looked like the shark had a rupture to its stomach, likely what caused its death. One of the fishermen cut the rupture open a little wide, and we could see an arm protruding from it. There was a body inside of the shark's belly. It looked like it belonged to a young person, short in stature. It was a horrifying sight. The small person was covered in the shark's internal organs, and it looked as if it had been partially digested. When the shark's stomach was cut fully open, we realized that whatever the shark had eaten wasn't a person or a child. It looked like it wasn't from our planet. He said that it looked exactly like a depiction of a grey, you know, the kind of alien you see in the movies and documentaries. When he looked at the shark's head, he said that there was a burn mark running across it, which was the length of about 30 centimeters. It looked like it had been burned with some torch or fire. It was an interesting story. I never heard one like that before, where a shark eats an alien, but I felt like this would be a cool place to share it. Hey everyone, I wanted to include a couple other stories in this one. So if you're an avid watcher or listener, you might have heard these ones before. So feel free to jump off the video now. But I like these ones and I felt like they were at home in this little video. Thanks. This happened about 4 years ago, when I was in college. Back then I didn't really care about credits or attendance really. I was enjoying the college life a little too much. My university was out in the middle of the countryside, which meant that there wasn't all that much to do at night. So I would often go on road trips and night drives with 3 regular friends. It was a warm summer night and we were being idiots like we usually did. My friend was clinging to the roof of the car while I drove. He wanted to see how long he could hold on for. I saw Jackie Chan do it, and I thought it would be really cool if we could do it. This should go without saying, but please don't try this. It's really stupid, and he could have died. So, he was on the roof, and one of my friends shouted out of the window that we had hit 40 kilometers an hour, which is about 25 miles per hour. "That's enough, stop, I'm gonna fall," he said. "You give up? I'll show you no mercy," I said. I started to slow down a little. I wasn't a monster, I was just kidding. "Stop the car, man, I'm really gonna..." Then I heard a dull thud on the road behind. I felt an instant sense of dread rise from the pit of my stomach. I called out to my friend, and I didn't get a response. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my friend was lying there in the road. I pulled over and ran over to him. Fortunately, because I had slowed down, he didn't seem that injured. The only thing is that he broke his watch. I asked him what happened, and if he lost his grip. He said that he didn't lose his grip. He was distracted by something, and he just pointed towards the moon. "It's just the moon, you dumbass," I said. "Look closer, you dumbass," he said. When I looked closer, I could see something flying through the air. It was glowing purple. Was this a UFO? It was a flying object I had never seen before, so that's what it felt like. I stood there dumbstruck, staring at the purple flying object. It was really bright. We had driven up to this observation area in the mountains, usually popular in the day but quiet at nighttime. I experienced a different kind of fear that day. Sure, I have been scared by horror films and the thought of a home invader or something, but I'd never been so deeply chilled by the presence of something so incomprehensible, so inconceivable. I think that all four of us were experiencing this new sense of terror. We were literally shaking. That flying object, it was shimmering. It seemed to have an ability to teleport. It had now moved closer to the summit of the mountain, closer to where we were. "We have to check this out, guys," one of my friends said. About that guy. He was 22, a self-proclaimed stud despite being a virgin. How the hell did this guy become the most confident in our little friend group all of a sudden? My fear was overpowered by my curiosity. I mean, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I had to go. And through the power of convincing, my other two friends gave us the okay sign. We drove towards this shimmering object, full of a mix of fear and excitement. I remember clearly that one of my friends said the light must be coming from some sort of construction lamp nearby. The instant my friend said that, we heard a terribly loud noise coming from the direction of the light. It was hurting my ears. My friend asked me to pull over. He looked as if he was about to cry. Before I stopped the car, I felt like I hit something and ran it over. We were all visibly in pain, and now curiosity gave way to panic. We were sweating profusely. I could see it teeming off our brows. I had to get out and check the damage to the car. My dad made me keep a flashlight in the glove box. I still do to this day. There was no damage to the car. Off in the distance, we heard that crushing sound. It sounded like the snapping of giant trees. It was monstrous. I just wanted to get in the car and get away. We couldn't stop the ringing in our ears. It was really scary. I shouted to everyone to get back in the car. The shining object in the sky was moving again. It was descending the mountain in a straight line. It was approaching our direction with some speed. I felt like this couldn't possibly be happening. I shouted at them to hurry up and get in the car, and once we were all in, I sped away from the light. I must have broken some speed rules that night. Maybe I was channeling my inner Jackie Chan, who knows. Everyone was silent in the car. We went to a convenience store at the bottom of the mountain. It for some reason felt safe there. The shining purple UFO thing seemed to hover in place where I thought I hit something, and then we watched as the light slowly faded into the dark. I have no idea what the hell happened that night, but it felt like something otherworldly. We told our friends about that night, and unsurprisingly, no one believed us. What was that thing in the sky? A new government-tested aircraft? A UFO? I guess we'll never know. Whatever it was, only the four of us saw it. This happened when I was in university, when I was driving home from a trip. The roads were really dark as I was in the countryside. The mountains and trees were blotting out the moonlight. All of a sudden, my engine began to splutter and slow until it eventually came to a stop. I'm not the best with cars, so rather than waste any time with guesswork, I figured I'd call roadside rescue. I had that as part of my insurance. There was nothing much I could do except wait for someone to arrive. It was creepy out there. The forests are home to strange noises at night. After a little while, a bright light lit up the road and it was aimed at my car. I thought that roadside rescue were early. I couldn't believe my luck. But when the light got closer, I realized that It wasn't them. It was strange. It didn't look like the light of a normal headlights. It stopped about 50 meters in front of my car and didn't move. It was getting a bit weird now. Unlike standard headlights, which are divided into two light sources, whatever was in front of me had only the one source of light. That light was so bright it didn't seem safe at all. It seemed not to have the same purpose as a light bulb. I didn't like it. And then I saw them. 3 people approaching from behind the light. These were very thin and very tall, pushing 2 meters, I'd say, 6'6". As they moved from behind the light to in front of it, I could see the lines in their face. Their faces were really gaunt and long. There was something off-putting about these 3 people that I couldn't quite put my finger on at first, but then I realized what it was. Their style of clothes and hair, etc. They looked like they were from another time period. It was like they had been wearing the same clothes since the 70s. They were wearing chinos, polo shirts, stuff like that. They approached my car and one of them spoke to me. Once again I noticed there was something slightly off-putting about these people. When they spoke, it had all the wrong intonations. Like he was emphasizing the wrong syllables. I'm not quite sure how to explain it, but it just wasn't right. It made listening to them difficult. Yet I detected no accent to indicate that they were foreign.
"Where did you come from?"
he asked. I chose to remain silent before answering that. I didn't want to let these strangers know about my car's engine trouble, because essentially, I couldn't get away from them.
"You have a trouble with your car and I can fix it,"
he said. It scared me that he knew that. I said thanks, but no thanks. I had already called roadside rescue. The man was persistent. I kept refusing. I really didn't want to speak to these guys out here in the woods alone. Then the strangest thing happened. My thoughts felt like they were changing. Like I had to mentally wrestle with myself not to allow them to work on my car. It felt like my mind was being changed for me. I started to wonder if maybe they could help. Maybe it would be a good idea to unlock the door and let them in. I got out of my car, half of my mind screaming at the other half, imploring me to get back into my car and get the doors locked again. I couldn't fight it. I started following them towards the light. I was completely transfixed. I didn't need to think for myself. I tried to raise my arm, but I couldn't because I wasn't in control of it. I wanted to be scared, but this calm voice inside my head reassured me that there was nothing to fear. That part of me was still screaming to do anything I could to get away from these men, but that internal voice of mine was getting quieter and quieter. While I was walking towards that bright light, my phone started to ring. It must be the roadside rescue people. It snapped me back to reality. I was in control again. I was able to answer the phone. I was back. I knew that that phone needed to be on. Something about that call saved me. I must have explained my location in about 10 different ways to the rescue people. I really wanted to be accurate. I didn't want to be out here anymore. Whilst I was on the phone, the men were trying to get me to take up their offer of help. I hated the way they towered over me. In their faces, they were so pale and thin, like barn owls. I refused. I had to. I ran back to my car with my phone clamped to the side of my head. And that was when they began to get angry. They were screaming and shouting by the side of my door. I began to doubt myself. Usually I would never refuse a kind favor, as I would be willing to do the same for someone in my situation, but given what just happened, I knew I couldn't trust these men. They were trying to express anger, but it was like the concept was entirely new to them. Eventually they gave up and headed back towards the beam of light. Before leaving, they did this weird thing simultaneously in front of my car. They placed an open palm on their foreheads and then slapped it. It's like as if you're doing a high five to your own head. Their fingers were long and spider-like. I don't have a clue what that gesture is supposed to mean. The light then shot backwards at tremendous speed and it was gone. Shortly after, the roadside rescue team showed up. The guy went to check the engine and couldn't find a single fault with it. He put my keys back in the ignition, turned it, and my engine started without issue. That really freaks me out because I know that my engine stopped. I hated it, but I needed to get out of the woods. I headed in the direction the light shot off in and managed to get home without any further incident. However, when I woke up the next day, I had a really strange rash all over my body. I went to see a dermatologist and he couldn't figure out the cause of the rash. I think the rash went away after 10 days or so with the cream and ointment I got from the dermatologist. I'm sure that rash was related to the bright light and those 3 men. Well, I say men, I'm not entirely convinced of that fact. About 2 years after this happened, I was at a party and a woman said that when she was driving out in the mountains in the same area that I was with her boyfriend, they said they saw something similar to what I did. She said on 2 occasions she saw beams of light flying across the night sky. Some people snickered at that, but I didn't. It felt all too real. Did we have some sort of encounter with a UFO? It must be really hard to believe this, but I wish I could just give you my memories or my mind for a while. The fear those 3 tall men instilled in me was otherworldly. That said, I don't know why my mind changed to trusting them like a light switch being switched on and off. It lingers in my thoughts often. It was truly disturbing. At the end of last summer, 2 friends and I went camping by a local lake. We drove out to the campsite, set up our tents and had dinner. Everything was going so well. It was a fun night. We lit a fire and sat around it talking for a while. It would be a long while before we were ready to go to sleep. We spoke about the lake and how it was responsible for claiming a fair few lives each year. Some say it's a place where people go to end things, and others say that the waters are deceptively deep and filled with tangled weeds, tree limbs, and the riverbed is lined with thick, unescapable silt and mud. As we 3 sat there in front of the fire talking, we all noticed something out on the other side of the lake. There were bright lights. Since there were other campsites dotted around the lake, we passed this off as simply another group of people camping out for the night. We didn't pay it much attention. After a while, I noticed that the lights seemed to be getting bigger and brighter. We continued chatting, and then the light caught our attention again. It looked as if it was moving closer to us. Again, it seemed to grow bigger and bigger. It was moving way too fast to be a rowing boat, and motorboats were prohibited on the lake. Before we knew it, the light had made its way to our side of the lake. The light was right in front of us, and then it was over us. It was as if we were being slowly swallowed by this bright light. In every direction I looked, I could see nothing but light. Just as soon as it came, it was gone. In total, I would say that the light was over us and around us for no more than 3 seconds, tops. My friends and I were smoking around the campfire before the light approached, and I remember this very clearly. I watched my friend light up as the light was moving, and by the time the light was gone, my friend dropped the cigarette he had between his fingers as it had burned down to the filter and burned the insides of his index and middle fingers. A fresh cigarette shouldn't burn down to the filter in a matter of 3 seconds. It seemed like we had some missing time we couldn't account for. Me and my friends didn't even have our smokes. They were gone. This wasn't even the strange part though. No, the smokes were weird. But it gets weirder. My friend who got burned started screaming as he didn't know what was going on, and his screams were the first thing I can remember I heard after that light passed over us. I think that I was in some kind of trance until that moment. I looked down and I was knee-deep in the lake. He was up to his waist in the lake, and our other friend was silently wading further and further into the middle of the lake. We both screamed out to him, and yet he didn't respond. We tried to get over to him as quickly as possible, but you know what it's like running in water. We were also sinking as we ran. I gave up and swam for it. The dirty lake water went in my mouth. I got to him first, since I was further than my other friend in the lake, and as soon as I reached him, I slapped his back and shook him until he regained consciousness. None of us knew what the hell we were doing in the lake. But I can tell you this, if my friend wasn't smoking, then things would have ended differently. The lake is incredibly deep in the middle, and since my friend was up to his chest, I dread to think what might have happened to him and us. The chances of drowning seem high. I have nightmares about me walking deeper and deeper into dark, murky water, unable to stop myself, watching the light above me grow darker and darker as I sink to the bottom. I know firsthand now how dangerous it is in that lake. I have no idea what that light was. Was it something paranormal or extraterrestrial? I don't think I'll ever find out because I'm never going back to that lake. We got out of the lake, dried off, and packed everything back into our car as fast as we could, leaving most of the things we brought behind. We left and nothing further happened, but that night is one I think about frequently.